So part of this class is going to be mostly focused on the pen tool and learning like what it is, how to master it, because it's something that I know when I started in like creative realms, it's something that like I just didn't get a full grasp of, and like knowing all of the hotkeys and knowing like really how to make it work for you is super useful across many, many programs. It's very surprising, especially in MadMapper. If you want to make a mask, like you can use Bezier tools in there. You can import, your own vector paths, and then something I didn't show last time was actually you can use vector paths as lines that like auto animate and have some really cool effects in MadMapper. So I'm focused on the pen tool primarily, but because it kind of pairs well with the projection mapping aspect, we'll have like a ton of work time today to, if we want to bust out some projectors, we can play with that. Quick about me, I think you learned a little bit about this last week. It's been a year already, but I'm just going to kind of throw some things out here because the pen tool has become a lot of what I work on. Following graduation, I worked at JDK Design, so a lot of this stuff, I was working on industrial design and, a lot for Burton snowboards, so a lot of like digital production, and a lot of that became like cutting masks, layering things, like hiding layers, separations of different like screen printing, cutting out the board shape, like a lot of like very specific things, especially when it comes to footwear design. I was thrown into it sketching like lateral and medial top views of shoes. All of that we did in Illustrator. So it was all with the pen tool, like making sure lines are smooth. If there's like a little kink in it, that a factory is going to put a little kink in your shoe and you don't want that. I got into projection mapping. This was actually the first thing that I projection mapped, mostly because, not that I was scared of Beziers, but I wanted something simple. So like when you start with mapping, you typically start with something that has hard edges to it. I think last week we did a lot of like books and like rectangles or like spaces, corners and things. It just makes it a lot easier to kind of grasp the concept. So this was the first thing I projection mapped, and I actually just was full screening Photoshop at the time because I didn't know what I was doing. But it was fascinating to, the tools don't really matter, but they help, obviously. So some of my work with ghost signs, as Nazani mentioned, focus on the pen tool a lot. Like I am constantly creating type that I'm finding in these walls. This was part of the series I did at the London Design Festival in 2017 or 2016, I believe. So this is my digital recreation of what I could see and a simulation of it projected before I actually projected it. This is as worn as some of these things can get. So like you can sort of see little hints of letters here. So yeah, you can sort of see a little bit of a flare in the top there, some like vertical, ascenders here. There's some sort of vertical letters going on, but through this project, I'm constantly a detective for old type. It's very satisfying as well because you're kind of putting together what these letter forms are. Here's sort of the actual projection on itself. You can sort of see all the little pixels because this was a pretty tall installation, as well as my shadow that's kind of casting, the revival onto it. And then here's sort of like a little bit of a side-by-side, little drop shadows. Again, none of this is like perfect per se, but this was like a crop in. What we just saw was the word turning, first turning left. And this is in Stoke Newington, or this is in Bankside, London. So there's a lot of things that I didn't know as far as like wordage, and SE1 is like kind of a little section, area. But all this is with the pen tool. Some things are simple strokes, some things are outlines, and I'll get into what that means. Here's just another kind of video example of the Light Capsules project. Coca-Cola is not just a logo you can just download and slap on there. Everything's hand-painted, so it's a great kind of use case for practicing using the pen tool because no S is the same. Even copying these 2 layers of Coca-Cola on top of itself, they weren't even close to the same. They obviously one was a lot wider, and it's pretty satisfying. This one's pretty easy. This is going to be in our example document to kind of play with because you can sort of see enough of it, but it's worn enough. So there's some fun things there. But here's what the vectors look like, and then here is kind of my outline version is what it's called. And this was a single line that I expanded, so we can get into all of that as we kind of continue. And here's a fade of something worn to something that has been kind of resolved. There's so many like little flares to hand-painted signs that I think is really fun to play around with the pen tool. It's not just like a straight points everywhere. You have to play with different types of handles and Beziers. So we'll get into all of that. That's just kind of a quick overview. So what we're going to do, I'm going to send you to another bit.ly link that is a document we can download onto an Illustrator blank file, basically a template file, and I'll walk through kind of with you. All of those things. We're going to work on making vector masks, compound clipping paths. There's a lot of different ways to group things. So selection tool grouping tricks. Pathfinder is super, super powerful as far as, I have a square and I want to cut out a circle. You overlay them, boom. Pathfinder is great for that. And then live corners, which is something that Illustrator introduced maybe 2 years ago now, but it really changed the way you can very quickly curve edges and have them be really dynamic. So I'll kind of go through all of that and take any kind of questions along the way. Again, the best thing, I'm kind of glad we have a smaller group because it's going to be way more hands-on of click and that sort of thing. So go ahead to this link. This link is going to bring you to this file, Mastering the Pen Tool. And once you're here, if you just scroll down, we're going to download this CC. I also saved out CS3 unless anyone's going super retro Adobe right now. Before we jump in there, I will kind of go through a little game called Bezier.cc, I think, and we can kind of go through it together. But once you're here, go ahead and download this blank Illustrator file, and then once that's downloading, click this next link here, bezier.method.ac, to the Bezier game. So as you probably know, Pen Tool is essentially just creating points, vector points in different areas, and the lines that connect all these points becomes like a vector shape. So this game goes through a few different stages here where you're going to click in one of these points here. Again, I'm only just clicking. I'm not holding any other keys down. I'm going to put a point here, and I'm basically filling in the line. It says 1 node remaining. Click down here. Cool, I finished the first level. Second level, very similar, but you can, instead of just free moving it around, we're going to start at the top here, put a point here, and you can hold down Shift, and that's going to keep your direction to a 45-degree angle or 90-degree angle. So it's super helpful if you're just drawing a box. If you're going, straight angles, you want to keep things consistent.
Holding down Shift.
Yep. So you hold down Shift, and you'll notice that the line is staying precisely on 45 degrees. If I kind of go around this circle, I'm just hovering, it goes in any specific direction on 45 degrees. So I'll bring that down here. I'll keep holding, I'll press Shift again because I want that to go straight down here. I'm gonna hold Shift again, bring it over here, and just keep drawing this up here. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you're gonna click on this left side and then drag, and you'll start to see this arrow, these handles in both ways. So this is called like a Bezier, a handle. If I hold Shift, so I'm clicking and dragging, I'm holding Shift and then letting go, and now it's kind of looks like it has a bit of a curve to it. It's not just like a straight line, and this is showing kind of how the curve is going to be influenced. So if I just click a point up here, it's going to kind of error because I didn't click and drag. So I want to click where I want the vector point, and I'm going to drag it out so the handle's there. I'm going to click this next one on the right here in the middle, drag it down. You can hold Shift or not, Shift is how, it should be done a little bit easier here, but again, this is very intro, so don't stress out too hard about it. Clicking at the bottom here, holding Shift, and then close enough. There we go. Okay, so now this one, let me see if we can zoom in a little. There we go. Nice. So much like Shift keeps to an angle, Alt will break the Bezier. So bear with me here. I'm going to start to click in the middle here, and I'm going to drag it out away from the angle that I'm at. The default is that these handles are the exact opposite direction from each other, right? So as I'm clicking and dragging, it expands farther. That is because it wants to do the smoothest curve possible, and the best way of doing that is saying, hey, here's this point, go equally this way as it is the other way. So that circle that we made before looked really smooth because it's equal, influence off of each vector. So for this one though, we obviously want a sharp point. So the way to do that is to drag it out and then hit Alt. Is that how they're doing that? So I'm going to drag this down and to the right. So my top left aligns with where they are suggesting to put a point. So again, I'm clicking and dragging to the bottom right. And when I have it in the right place, then I want to hit Option or Alt. And now I have like free movement of only the right side here. Again, don't worry, we're going to do a lot of stuff in Illustrator. This is kind of just like showing you the different kind of tools to get started. And I want to tell the influence of this point to say, go over this way. And now I have this like much wider curve here. So I want to like click down at the bottom, drag this out away to the left where I'm going to start going around. But what I'm doing is I'm telling the influence of the Bezier handle that it was coming into to go over this way. Hold Alt again, go up to where I want it to go. And now that I've done that work, all I have to do is click at the top and it will drag the rest. So for this one, obviously it's looking like some straight lines. So we want to go, one point here. I'm going to hold Shift because this looks like a pretty strong edge bumper here. I'm going to click this edge. I'm going to work down over to the wheels. And I'm just putting single point clicks. I'm not doing any Beziers because those are hard angles. Now that I've got to the wheel though, there's a few different things we can do. The best thing for these sort of half circles is kind of like when we made the full circle, we only had 4 points. So if you think of it, we actually don't need a curve coming, like a Bezier coming out of that point necessarily. We can just click the bottom middle and drag to make this curve. I can hold down Shift so I know I'm like right in line, then let go. So I have that curve there. And then now that we're coming around to this wheel, I don't need to click and drag because it's going to influence that a little too much. And I know I want like a straight line. So I'm just going to click once. And now I have those wheels. So I have one Bezier curve at the bottom of the wheel here, but everything else is fully straight. Hold Shift and go over, click once. And then I'm going to click and drag. So the way of thinking about it is if you want a hard edge, you click. And if you want a curve, you click and drag. So that's kind of like the rule of thumb. So the bottom left, I'm going to click and drag. I'm going to hold Shift, and then I'm going to let go. And then click here again. Let's go up around these corners here. And then for here, this is a little tricky because it seems like I can, again, there's undo and everything. So I'm going to try by like clicking kind of in the middle of the curve. And in general, you kind of want to put points on like the, kind of like with the wheels here, you want to put it on the farthest point of the curve generally. I'll go into this farther more detail as we're there, but it almost looks like there's a little like kink in the curve of this hood. See that little bit here? So I'm going to click and drag this out. And now I can see, oh, my line kind of like, it's lining up a little bit. And I can let it go and see what that looks like. It looks like it's a little too much influence, but I don't think I can, yeah, that'll be an Illustrator. We'll just get into Illustrator to show that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this out to where I want it, and I'm going to press Option, and I can actually pull this back so it's a little less of an influence. And let's see if that helps. Okay, so that helped a little bit. And I'm going to click once. I'm going to click down here, and then it looks like I don't have any nodes left, but I should be able to make it if I click here and then drag up to make the last point. So there's a lot of this is a great practice. Maybe once we get into Illustrator, you can kind of come back to this game, maybe at the end of the class and see how you've improved and everything. But that's kind of an overview of kind of how Beziers work in general, like click versus click and drag. And those are kind of like the two most important pieces. I'm going to go through the Pen Tool Workshop Illustrator file next. So how I've set this file up, just as a heads up, is I have a layer you should ignore that's called cheat codes, where I have a completed version to the right. So you can kind of compare like what you've done, and we're going to kind of go through basically a bunch of these different things that we're going to test, vectorize, but we'll make sure you get a laptop, so you can follow along. So for the first one here, you want to make sure you're selected in your work here as the layer, just because we want to like work in this space. And I'm just going to go through a quick, this bit.ly pen tool workshop has a ton of information in it. So primarily we're going to focus on hotkeys once we kind of like get into the flow of things. And this whole document here is going to be a great resource just for you to kind of be practicing and to like as a reference for obviously undo, copy, paste. But there's a lot in here which, you know, there's a lot of pen tool settings. Click, click and drag, Option/Alt click, removes Bezier. So there's a bunch of this that will just take practice, to be honest, of like memorizing if I want to click and drag or click with Option, click Shift Option. Like you kind of feel like a DJ once you're really good at it because you're pressing all these buttons and clicking and dragging. So as we go through it, feel free to scroll down and reference in here a few different things. But as we kind of get into Illustrator, the pen tool is obviously this little one that is in the top left. Any of these tools is really helpful to actually hover over them if you're not sure what they are, just in general. If I were to click the pen tool, that obviously selects the pen tool, but I can click and hold, and it's going to open up a few different options in here. Same with like selection. There's a lot of benefits to the group selection tool, or I always call it the Hollow Plus tool, even though it debatably looks like a filled tool versus this one being the primary selection tool. But what this does is select individual groups. So once we kind of create a few shapes, I can show you the benefit of that. We're going to start with the pen tool itself. And much like the guide that we just did, you get to see kind of like, if I were to, you know, click, I'm just going to click off to the right here. But if I click, it creates a point, and I have like a line. If I click again, it's creating another point. If I click, it's the same sort of thing. I'm clicking. If I click and drag, it's going to do the same exact thing we saw where it creates a Bezier. And then I can sort of see the influence of my curve here. If I want to click and drag again, I'm going to do another curve. If I click, it's going to stop that curve to a hard edge again. I can click and drag, click. So just to familiarize yourself, you can do this. Once you're done with that shape, for example, you either want to close the shape. So if I bring it up here and close it, then that is now one shape. Or if I'm not closed and I want to just kind of have it be done, I can either go over to the selection tool and just click that, or V is the selection tool. Let's see, if you have this selected, V will just like go back to your selection mode. And now I have this shape. So one of the things as you're working with the pen tool that is different from the Bezier game is we can control any of these points. So I have the pen tool selected, but holding Command will, for a moment, bring up my hollow selection tool, which the difference between these, they call it direct selection tool. I'll use the real term instead of my made up ones. So direct selection tool will select an individual vector point versus the object selection tool will select the entire object if I want to like move this around, for example. And let me just kind of, I'll complete this shape here. I have some little abstract thing going on. And then I can change this color to like a, I don't know, let's do like a blue, for example. So that's kind of like the quick, I just made a random shape sort of thing. If you look to this left, I'm pretty sure this is pretty common in hopefully Inkscape as well, but you know, you have a fill and a stroke. So this obviously is a fill of blue and a stroke of black. This is where you'll see, again, if you hover over any of these, there's some really good quick tips that kind of show you a little bit of what it is. If I double click like the stroke, it'll open up this color and I can pick like, oh, I want to do like a dark red. And I hit OK, and now it's not very thick, but it's a stroke on there. I can change the stroke size. There's a lot of these different property things here. Or if you click this little hover here, default black and white, it'll just reset to that. One thing I did want to show is if this was not complete, let me like delete this. So as I'm drawing, if I draw like a new shape here, as soon as I have more than 2 points, it's going to add that fill, but there's an empty side because the shape isn't complete. So just something to keep in mind as you are kind of creating things. If you're working with a fill, you're going to want to fully complete that shape. And this little circle that's next to the pen tool is super important because it kind of tells you what is happening. And a circle means you're completing a shape. So I'll go through some of those things where, right now there's a little kind of asterisk, which means I'm starting a new shape. And I think I have these in kind of this as a reference here. So this is like saying pay attention to how the cursor changes. X is ready to draw a path. That's if you have caps lock engaged. For some reason, it's the same exact tool, but it's a different nav. But close a path is a circle. These little caret kind of angle arrow things versus the negative point versus a slash point. Again, a lot of this just takes practice, but we're gonna work through it. So this is gonna create a new shape. I'm gonna kind of, if I start in here, actually before I do that, I'll just keep doing this here. So new shape, as soon as I click and drag, that asterisk symbol goes away. So now I have this is a live shape that I'm building. As I move this around, I can now click again and again. And if I'm in the pen tool and I hover over one of the points that I already have, there's a little negative symbol that pops up, which means I can remove that, but it doesn't delete it from the overall shape. It just removes that point itself. If I keep kind of pointing around here, okay, here's a new shape. Now that I've completed that shape, it goes back to the asterisk, which is to create a new shape, essentially. So I'm constantly pressing P on the keyboard, which puts me into pen tool, and either pressing A, so it's P and A goes to the hollow selection tool, and then P brings me back to the pen tool. So it's just really important to kind of keep those things in mind. While I have the pen tool selected, so I press P, or you can select in the kind of top left over here. Holding Command, you can quickly select a point. So I do this all the time. I press and hold to select a point, and then I can, while holding Command, then just move this point around, which is really helpful. So once you have a little shape, you can kind of modify what it's going on. Or if you select one of these, you can use the arrow keys, shift arrow keys to move these around and really get in to a specific point. If it's I want this to be perfectly nested in here, arrow keys is sometimes easier than having a mouse or keyboard or anything like that. So, I'm just playing around with these different shapes here and, just kind of getting familiar with the pen tool versus the selection tool is the bulk of the work with using the pen tool. So in this file, the bottom right, as I was saying, has cheat codes over here. So let me close this blank one. Here's my working one. So there are some references to what it should look like, but I'm just going to go through as an example. We're going to draw on, let me open up the pen tool here, make sure my layer is visible. And I'm just going to go select what these points are that I've kind of outlined. And one of the things you'll kind of notice is this hot pink, these guides. They're called smart guides. You'll either love them or hate them. Happy to kind of turn those off if you go to View and then Smart Guides. Probably best to just turn them off for now so they're not as annoying, but they are helpful most of the time, but the other time it's really not. So I'm going to turn them off just so they're not as distracting for all of y'all. So again, I've selected the pen tool, and I'm going to click in the middle of one of these points here and then drag down. We're going to create the letter A in Futura. And here's how. So no need to click and drag for this because there's no Bezier. So I'm going to drag down to this point here. I'm going to hold down Shift because I know this bottom one is pretty straight. Click here. Oh, I'm going to go back to my just simple black and white here. And then up over to this point. You'll notice I'm kind of covering up. It's made some of the points disappear. So what I want to do is actually go over to this fill and stroke section, and you can click this small little point here which says none, and that means it's going to turn the fill off. So that's probably going to be very helpful as we go forward, and then we can always add a fill back in. So Again, if you go over to this kind of point here, just hit none, it'll make that disappear. And then we'll go down to this point here. I'm going to click this point here, and then hover over to complete the shape. And again, there's a circle that pops up. So very dependent interface, or it depends on, different situational places, but that's going to complete that shape. And now I have the outline of this A. Now that that is complete, I have an asterisk which says, hey, the pen tool's ready to make another shape. So I'm going to go here, click a point. Again, that asterisk went away, which means I'm like actively building a shape, and you can tell by this line. So if you're moving your cursor around, you see a line connected, it means you're building an active shape. I'm going to click here again. I'm going to just hold Shift to make this bottom line straight, and then go back and complete that shape. So that was a quick kind of show of creating this shape here. If I wanted to select these two, let me click one. So again, the selection tool is clicking each object. And if I wanted to create this, let's see, I'll make this, like a green color, for example. I'll double click this fill, and then I'll bring a green over here. And what's happening is this shape, if I click and drag it around, is just the outer shape. And then this shape, if I were to also make it green, is a shape here. So what we want to do is, I'll move these back together here. There's a few different ways to do this, but I want everyone to get to this point first, and then I can show you like a little compound. So one of the things I wanted to show is you have these two shapes. There's a couple different ways to kind of cut this smaller triangle out of the bigger triangle. One of the easy ways of doing it is using the Pathfinder tool, which is up in Window, Pathfinder. And it looks like this. It has like a few different options here. But what these each do is kind of what the icon suggests. So the first one is to combine them together. So if I were to, for example, like this was off to the side, if I hold Shift and select both of these, together is going to make it one object. I'll undo that. Minus front will cut it out. Basically, like whatever's on top of it will cut what do they call it? Intersect. So that is, obviously the shape that combines the two. So if you think of a Venn diagram, like what's in between those two, it creates a shape, which actually be really easy to simulate. Here's a circle, and then these two selected, cut that out, or cut that shape here to a little teardrop. And then all these lower parts, not shape modes, pathfinders, are more for like creating, let me get this back into the middle here, for creating different like shapes. So let me just make a couple more little circles. And there's ways that these cut the objects together. So it's like a slice and dice sort of thing. You can chop the whole selection, and this is all grouped together. So I'll want to ungroup these, but now I have like a bunch of different shapes here. So there's a lot of like different powerful ways of doing this where I didn't even use the pen tool to do that. So Pathfinder is super useful. So one of the things I wanted to show as far as the selection tool goes, first let me just finish this thing here. So I'm selecting these two. Here's the inner shape and the outer shape. And I'm going to use this minus front Pathfinder, which is going to cut out the middle. So now if I click this, I have just the letter A as one object. Select something else, and my primary selection tool is going to select that whole object. The hollow tool, again, selects individual points. The shortcut of that is A, so if you did want to select an individual point, again, that's super important, so get familiar with like A and P. It's like constantly what I end up pressing. There's other things in this A selection, which is a group selection. So what you can do with that is actually select a shape versus an object. So because we made this full shape here, if I were to select it with V is the like regular, the black selection tool, it's going to select the whole object. If I go into this hollow, I keep calling it hollow plus group selection tool, and click to deselect it, I can select each one of these paths individually. So then I can click and drag this, which is now gonna look kind of funky, but if I wanna change something about that, I can very easily do that. If I press A to just select our direct selection tool, all I have to do is hold Option and it will bring that little plus selection up. So again, all about the hotkeys, but it's very helpful to then hold Alt and select just this shape. Same with this is like now one big group, but I know these are separate objects, right? So I can press A and it has everything selected. I want to deselect, and now I can either do Option, Shift, or sorry, just Option, and I can select that inner shape. If it has a fill on it, you can also just use the A tool. Instead of pressing a point, you can generally just press the middle of it and it will select that individual shape. And then if I go back to my, let's see, bring this over here. If I go back to my regular kind of full black selection tool, when I click that, it's gonna select the whole object or the whole group if you happen to have things grouped together, or if you're using the Pathfinder tool. It's just really important because you might be like, why can't I move? I just wanna move this little one and everything's grouped up together. So just some things to think about there. One of the things I wanted to show as well was like if I did have this, again, these are now separate again. Another version is doing a compound path. So that is Command 8, or you can make or release a compound path or a clipping path. We're gonna go into this in another slide, like another work thing here, because we're essentially gonna cut off a hat off of its background, and we want to use a clipping path or clipping mask for that versus a compound path. For this, I want a compound path because it does the exact same thing, honestly, as the Pathfinder, where you're like minus the front. It's essentially combining these shapes into one shape, and the way it renders it is essentially like if I have this shape over here, this could be two different shapes that are completely separate from each other, but when they overlap, it is going to cut out what it is because it's actually the same geometry. They just call it a clipping path itself. If these overlap, it's not doing that, but if I select both of these, make it a compound path, it's like trying to render the same shape geometry in its own self. So any overlap is considered like a negative or like a hole in the object. So that's super helpful for things like these, the holes in typography, where you have, obviously you cut out for P and a D. So if you end up using, a big use case of learning the pen tool and making all this in Illustrator is you can use like a CNC machine or a laser or, engraver, and if you're cutting out a material, you don't want like the A's, like the little piece of the P basically to fall out of a material. So you can do things like adding a bridge and all of that, which I can show you in here as well. But primarily I just want you all to start getting comfortable with the pen tool itself. I highly suggest just kind of creating some shapes over here, and once you have some shapes, to like modify them a little bit. So again, I'm pressing A and I'm kind of moving these points around like this. And as we're learning the pen tool, the next step obviously is modifying those Beziers. So before we kind of get down to this top hat, I want to kind of show a little bit more of that so you get a little more comfortable, and I'll come around and just kind of help as far as the Beziers go. But I'll first kind of show this. So again, I have like an interesting fill color and outline first, so I can kind of have something to see that's not just black and white. So I'm going to, let's see here, click. Let me do, I don't know, what's a good kind of shape here? I'll click here, and I want to drag. I'll do like a Pac-Man, basically. So I'll click and drag, click and drag. It's going to be a very natural, organic-looking Pac-Man, not a perfect circle. Click. So now I have this open here. I'm going to kind of pull the mouth open here. Okay, so now that I have this shape, I probably want to adjust some things where it's like, oh, this, these Beziers might want to change. So different than the game we were playing, I can click any of these shapes or any of these objects. Let me just change this color, might be a little easier. Green, so a little easier to see. So I can click and move any of these These are the vector points, and then these are the handles. So as I move these around, it changes, obviously, the shape. So feel free to kind of create some shapes and play around with these handles, and you'll see they stay kind of locked in line. Again, that creates like the smoothest, it's trying to create the smoothest curve possible, but it starts looking a little wonky. And then once you select these, you can actually adjust some of these things. So if I did want to hold Option, let me have my pen tool up here, it'll create this sort of shape. So what we were doing when we created the heart, for example, does just that. So now I've broken this shape, and now that it's off to the side here, I can actually select that it's no longer chained to this other handle. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that, as far as like, you know, I've given Pac-Man a little booty now. But if I want that to go back, if I'm like, oh crap, I really don't like the booty I've given Pac-Man, I can go back to the pen tool and hold Option again. So holding Option is going to be, or Option or Alt will be your way of modifying anything Bezier based. So I'm going to hold Command to bring up this little the direct selection tool, which is super helpful. So Command, I'm constantly between like Command and Option. Selected that, and now I can hold Option to get this little arrow here. Again, these are hotkeys. You can also just go up here and open, like use the anchor point tool directly. But what this does is if I click and drag it, if I just click it, it's gonna delete the Bezier and make a sharp angle. If I click and drag it, I'm now able to like draw fresh Beziers. So that's super helpful if you're like, oh, I roughed out a shape, but I wanna, you know, move this around. Same with this mouth here. Maybe I'm like, oh, I wanna like make a round mouth versus a, you know, sharp mouth. Animate Pac-Man talking or something, who knows. But in the same way, I can also do, again, from the heart lesson, hold Option, get the bottom point, so the Bezier away from me in a good spot, hold Option, and now I've broken that. Oh, no, which one is it? No? Oh, okay. Hold Option, and I can break that one and make it more of like a, you know, sharper point here. So holding Command to direct selection tool, move these points around here. So it's like again, all practice, all getting used to, but I just wanted you all to kind of play, get comfortable with like the pen tool itself, selecting points, moving. So once you're comfortable with that, let's move down to vectorizing this top hat, which is like really, it's a good use of kind of the tool constantly. It's the best way of kind of cropping an object off of its background if you're not either doing like a selection tool. I mean, Photoshop has its place where you're like, oh, I'm just gonna do like a, you know, a easy selection or channel masking or something like that. But the most professional way of doing it is using the pen tool to create a vector shape that cuts this raster image off the background. One of the other things I wanted to show is Command Y, or up in View. It's the very first thing in View because it's very important for all of this is outline. So if I click outline view versus preview, these modes, again, Command Y, you can just press to go back and forth, is super helpful. You'll notice type will turn into an outline. Anything that's just a vector, same with images, are just gonna be a box. So, you know, it's very helpful to see like what is vector. This next kind of page, for example, it's all these photos of butterflies, but in outline mode, it's just a box that is linking to a photo. So there's no data here. If I wanted to say, oh, put this on, you know, the laser cutter, I want to like cut out this vector shape, there's nothing there, and that's where the pen tool comes into play. So what we can do is by cutting this out, it'll give us a vector shape. Again, very 101, but vector files are infinitely scalable. It's just math. So all the points that we're putting have specific locations. It's saying, hey, you know, X over and Y up is where this point needs to live. And you can actually see in the transform all that data. Like we are just building math, the shapes based on math. And the Beziers are saying, you know, influence this much, that creates like a mathematical curve. We're not seeing any of that math directly, but we're able to kind of modify it. So one of the things here, I always like to start in like a corner or like a point. So looking at this top hat, I definitely gravitate towards like this point back in here. I'm gonna just click it once, because again, I don't have a direct curve that I'm influencing. So I'm gonna bring that up here. I'm gonna go halfway up on this curve and then click and drag to make like a soft curve here and then let go. Let me change this to something you can actually see. How about a vibrant green? And then I'll bring this down a little size-wise. Cool. And then I'm gonna click the edge of the top hat here, and then I'll click and drag a little bit because I have a bit of a curve here, and feel free to zoom in and take control here. And then I'm gonna go maybe right here. Again, a lot of this is just based on my own experience or like how many points, but ideally you wanna use as few points as possible when you're using the pen tool. So like I could go, like a small point like this. I can go a little bit further and do like a little bit point. It's a good starting path, I think, to do like little curves like this. But also I could achieve this with probably just one point in the middle, drag it out here. But I'm gonna go with like 1 point here to over here, click and drag that. The tricky thing is sometimes it will give you too far. See how it's like drawing a bulge off of my like hat already? I don't want that. So what I can do is hold Command, adjust this handle, pull it way back, and then this curve is a lot smaller. I can even adjust that a little more, and then click here, do a little one, and now I'm ready for my next big curve, which I might just go all the way down to this point here, click and drag up to create that. And now I wanna like cut this off here, so I can hold Alt to just cut it, or I can just cut it as I'm drawing and it will just cut that Bezier off, so I have like a new direction. So yeah, as you're building, feel free to use as many points as you want. General rule of thumb, at least in the kind of type design world, is you want to use as few points as possible, because having, a dozen points versus 8 points when you have literally a giant block of text, it will add more data. So you'll see like very intricate typefaces that have like a bunch of grain in them that are made up of a ton of points, will be a little bit heavier on a system, or maybe take like slightly longer to print or something. It's not like it won't break anything, but it's kind of just like a best use case. And then, you can get really in here and detailed if you want, where like I'm doing tiny little curves. Let me bring this stroke down here. I could get in here and really do like some tiny minute curves if I want to be like super specific with this shape, or if it's a leaf or the butterflies in the next exercise, for example, like there's little curves of the wings that you could do that isn't as vast as just doing like a long thing. So I'm going to just finish my hat down here. Put a few more points down on this edge. Got a pretty good curve over here. Again, the shorter distances will be easier as far as the points and handles go, but now I have like a full object. If I go into outline mode or view outline, I can see like, hey, here's my shape. And by selecting that and then selecting, let's see, the image, which is in these Pen Tool Workshop images. You might have to go into the layer itself to actually I had that locked, but if I select both of those things, I can then create a clipping mask, which is gonna cut it off the background. And now I have this like floating hat. So one of the ways, if you are wanting to kind of like work a little less damaging to your space, so say I have like a green shape here and I have a circle that I wanna cut out of it, there's some ways where you could just use this, like if I made this white, for example, it's gonna look like it's cut out here, but if I go into my outline mode, it'll still be there. So there's ways that you can literally just do this as a way of like creating something, and then when you send it to like a plotter, for example, you can then cut, let me say I have like this cool little logo. A lot of people just work this way, where you just have like very raw shapes, and then you can use the Pathfinder tool, cut it all out, and either just do shape modes to cut it. But yes, once that happens, you've now lost the shape that was there. So one of the other ways of doing that is if I select these shapes, these 3 shapes, which I know are going to be my one thing that I want to be all white, I can then combine those all. So I've united those to be all one shape here, and then select these 2, and then do my compound path again. And tricky thing is it's now going to be this side here. I'll have to cut off, but I still have this geometry that I can then modify in different ways. It's a little less damaging, but then also I can do if I select this point over here and either just delete it, or I can use the pen tool to kind of remove it and then bring these down here. The best way is, yeah, I can just absolutely just select, delete this one, bring this over here, and then I can at least modify this shape a little bit. But yeah, just something to keep in mind. There's no shame in just having shapes that are white. It looks like it's cut out, but it's not. It's kind of helpful as you're working, and then you still have access to these shapes to change. And then there's some other ways too where you're Pathfinders, again, these shape modes are somewhat destructive in a good way, but if I were to type some words and say words, let's make this, I don't know, let's go Helvetica, and I'll make this a little bigger. There are ways where you can actually, let's make this bold. This is editable type, right? So if I go into outline mode, it's still going to be dark versus my outlined type. I already outlined these. So the way to kind of modify some of this stuff is to go up to Object, Expand. And what that does is it's going to turn all of these into object and fill of that. So now this is not editable as type, but if I go into outline mode, I can now see all of the letter forms. This is kind of more of a 101 if you want to make your own logo and be oh, I want to change this here. I can delete these points, or I can, rather than delete them, I can subtract these points, or I can make these crazy. I can curve these. There's a ton of different ways where you can actually start with typography and end with a new kind of creation. One of the things, this is actually probably a good spot to show the live corners, but if you select any sort of object, you might notice in Illustrator these little points here. So even if I make a square, any sharp cornered object has these. If I click and drag, I can just very quickly add curves to it, which is a really, really easy way to kind of add some softness to really anything. So I can select this whole letter and then curve this, and now I have a whole different kind of vibe that doesn't look like Helvetica anymore. I can click this direction point, I can curve this out. Now I have a really funky looking typeface where I'm not even messing around with Bezier's. I'm just clicking these 2 points here, clicking this tiny little dot that appears between them, and now I can curve these. So this is called live corners, and it's a very easy way to, it's also non-destructive, so I can modify this on the fly. I can select specific corners to sharpen. If I want this to be, let's see, a little bit of softness, and then I can click this side here and make this bigger. So there's a ton of ways to modify corners just with live corners, and then all these little points in here are the actual curves. And that's also not destructive. So if I were to try and create this as an actual shape, and I'm going okay, here's my corner, here's this corner, over here and over here, it becomes very tricky when I'm modifying these to then modify, I wouldn't be able to quickly make that bigger. I'd have to move this point up here, move this point over here, etc. So live corner is very, very helpful in many different ways. Yeah, less destructive. But yeah, long story short, having these shapes is not a shame to just leave things there, especially as you're working. You want to make it easier for yourself. So let's go down to here. So one of the things as I was outlining these was considering material thickness. So another great thing about like making sure you know about the pen tool is you can actually, modify any of these points where you're like, oh, that's actually going to be too thin, so I can move these out very easily. I can move things all together. Like this might be way too brittle, but again, look at this. I have a lot of points on this one because I wanted that like organic detail. So feel free to kind of go through. These are really helpful, and then we'll jump into this logo as well. Yeah, especially these edges up top. I'll kind of do a little kind of demo of these. So again, just getting comfortable with the pen tool here as I'm drawing, clicking and drawing, click for a harsh point. I'll bring a curve out here, I'll bring a curve here. If I get to a nice edge point like this, I like to just kind of pull it down and then immediately just tap the end of it and it will cut it off. And then I can like click to influence that. Another way of doing all of this really is like if you wanted to move, let's see here. You can actually start with influence. So if I'm on the corner here, I can actually click and drag like we did starting out different shapes. So click and drag for that influence and then put this where I want. It's a little harder because you don't see where the line is going versus just click and then click and drag from here. But it's kind of like a personal preference as far as like what you would like to do here. The only thing about that is it has a handle on the other side. So if I were to come over here, say I'm doing a separate object, cutting this here, when I come back to here, if I were to click and drag to try and add some influence, as soon as I start to do that, it's like, oh, I want to help. Like, I'll make this as smooth as possible. And it's going to end up looking wonky. So if that's the case, then you have to drag that out, and then you can separate these different points however you see fit. So there's a lot of different ways to doing this. If you have the pen tool selected, rather than selecting an exact point, you can also just hover over a curve and actually just modify a curve entirely and drag it. Sometimes that's like a much more free-form way of moving things around. And then hovering, holding command to move a specific point. Maybe I want to draw that point out instead of the next one I can do here. You can also like just select the curve like between 2 points and then use arrow keys, which sometimes is super helpful, where you just want to like push it just out, or it's a little limiting, but sometimes it does help to just be like, oh, I'll move the arrow keys around and adjust handles that way. This one would be, yeah, a decent one to test. It's funny, I feel like you can play around with some of that fidelity. Actually, let me go to the next one just to like test, because this truly is a good, like, it's somewhat black and white. It's one object, and it's not vector. Live trace is basically where you'd want that, or image trace, and it's in the properties. It's also, I think, in object somewhere, image trace, object image trace. This was super terrible many years ago, so I have like a grudge against it, because it like, you can kind of tell when something looks image traced. But let's try it. Let's do image trace, create, and what it's going to do is assume where these vector points should go based on, yeah, the contrast, the brightness, and there's a lot of settings you can play around with. It has come a really long way, so I shouldn't bash it that much. But let's see, in the settings over here for image trace you hit the image trace panel, and there's all these info things here. So the preset could be logo. There's a lot in here that you could say, so usually this is a list, but sketch, logo, these are kind of helpful if it's like, oh, line art, it's going to reprocess it. That didn't work very well. 3-color, sometimes you can just do a 1-color, like specifically for this. I can try the single color and we'll see how that works. Even 3-color, that works pretty well. But let's do like silhouette, or I guess logo might be a good just bet, because it's going to try and emulate what a logo would be. So that looks pretty good. You can see some like slight jittering around the sides here, but you can do, again, like limited color. I think I can just do limited color to like how many colors we want. And then I can say in advance, there's all these like details where it'll kind of take the work out of, you know, actually using the pen tool for it. But corners, you can say like, oh, I want less corners because obviously this is, you know, mostly curved. And then you could say paths, noise. You can click simplify, and it's gonna like get rid of a lot of those like small jaggedy edges. Already looks a little better, but like the top looks a little curved here. Paths you can also like reduce so it doesn't have as many points. So you can kind of like, you can get pretty close here. If you're gonna do like, you know, reduce the anchor points enough that if you just want to vectorize something quick, again, now I've taken too much out of it, it's like a weird mushed up stamp. So you want to kind of like figure out what the best would be, and then I'll just show as we expand here. You can also say cut out, so we'll remove, let's see, overlapping. It's usually, oh, ignore color, so I can say ignore white, and now we'll cut it off the background. Let's say I like that, or let's see, I'll add a couple more pointers. You end up kind of like playing with it a bunch to get it just right. Obviously that doesn't look perfect, but I'm gonna say expand. And then if I go in my outlines, this is what it's made. So works kind of well. I think there's some benefits and some downsides to it. If I were to try and image trace, let's do that again. Object, image trace, create. For a photo, it's really interesting. There's definitely ways where you can easily vectorize things. Like this, technically, if I were to expand just whatever it did, it looks like this. So these are individual vector shapes, and it's just, that's a mess. So pen tool, again, is gonna be a lot more clean if you want like really smooth lines. Like if you put this through like a CNC machine or something, it's gonna absolutely hate you. If you are simplifying this to you know, simple stencils, or you're just doing like, oh, I want 3-color spray, you know, like a spray paint kind of art, then you could definitely do that here and be like, okay, colors, I want, you know, 6 colors. It's gonna simplify that photo down to 6 colors. So you could sort of see like, there's an aesthetic of art out there that I've noticed that has used image trace, and it's almost like, you can identify it once you have sort of like a trained eye. And for me, it's kind of like a little bit, like I know someone like took a shortcut, or it's just like not as unique to what someone could do on their own, which, you know, could be like, this is a great starter spot too, where you're like, oh cool, I'm gonna start with that, I'll expand this, and then I can like modify from there. So I'll like delete, you know, some of these, you know, this gets me honestly like a pretty good start for like these shapes, and then I can combine those. So like, there's no downside to like working with a tool that like gets you halfway there, especially if you're gonna like try and vectorize all of this. Like to use the pen tool to do this shape, like this might get you most of the way, and now I have the pen tool. So I can go in here and be like, actually, I'm gonna make this like, smooth this out, and I'll sharpen this. But anyway, now that I've destroyed the Apple logo, feel free to go through and vectorize that, or this is another great example, the old TriMet logo for Pathfinder. And off to the right here, where I have like, I guess, cheat codes, but it's kind of just guiding through like, hey, here's this low res logo, say a client gave you this and they're like, you know, we need a vector version of this logo. Super common ask. You know, the best way to do it is either, again, you're messing with, you could try image trace on this, or you can kind of look at this and identify like, hey, there's some pretty simple shapes in here, and I can either use the pen tool to select some of these shapes, or there's also like all of these shapes that you can kind of start off with. So one of the best things I like to do is like, again, use tools that are gonna help you get there. You don't need to draw with the pen tool a custom circle every single time. So drawing a circle, again, Alt, Command, Shift are all gonna be in your court here. So if I'm drawing a circle, let me switch. This is another great tool, is swapping the foreground for the background. Is that like little tiny arrow? Love that. So I can actually just use default stroke. And then another thing I love to do is just anything in parentheses is going to be the hotkey for that thing. So I very much, as you're like learning things, to be like, oh, I want to, I'll use this backslash all the time. If it's like, okay, I know I'm activated my fill. All I have to do is hit backsplash, and it's going to fill that with nothing. And then I can double click here and bring this to a better color. So let's do like a vibrant, something that'll stand out. So that's super helpful. And then, yeah, Shift X is another one where it's going to swap the fill and the bat. There's endless hotkeys that will make you really good at this. But so let me just go into, I'm making a circle here. So I have the ellipse tool, L, selected. Clicking and dragging a circle, just things to note on it because it's a little bit weird when you first, I'm just going to guide you through the circle tool. But if I hold Shift, it's going to draw a perfect circle. If I hold Shift and Option, it's going to draw a circle out from where I selected, which is arguably a way better way than just an arbitrary, like, you know, it's trying to draw from like a point. Obviously, like drawing a rectangle makes a lot of sense from that point. You can also hold Shift for a rectangle and it becomes a square, and you can hold Option and you'll draw from the center. So those are super helpful. Again, I'm holding down the cursor, pressing and holding Option. As a DJ, I'm like putting these modifiers, right? So like Option is gonna draw from the center, anything I want. So if I wanna do some like different shapes that way, or Option Shift, and then I'm, you know, changing there. So I'm gonna just kind of do a little example here of kind of roughing out these shapes. So I'm gonna hold down Shift. The other hotkey is spacebar to pan around. So like, I'm still holding my cursor. If I were to hold the spacebar, then I'm like moving this into place, can modify this around. I can hold Option, I can hold spacebar. Like there's all these different ways where rather than being like, oh, I drew a circle and now I have to move it over here and then like rescale it up, like none of that. You can actually just draw a circle as it's being drawn, hold down Shift, hold down Space and Shift, to get it into place, let go of spacebar to get it a little bigger. Now I need to move left, like hold spacebar, like all of this, I'm still drawing an object to get it right into this place, and then let go. Same with like scaling it. So if I were to, I'm scaling this, if I hold down Option, I'm making it smaller. I can hold down Shift to make it smaller. Another little fun detail of this is if I hold Option first, I'm going to copy it. So if you start seeing a bunch of objects, it's because you're holding down Option before you are releasing it. But a great example of that is if I hold down Option first and then scale it, and then hold down Shift, it should make a copy of it? No? Maybe that isn't a feature. Oh, all right. Well, then I use copy, Control F to paste in place, and now I can shrink that down, hold down Option and Shift to the place that I want, copy, paste, smaller, copy, paste in place, smaller. So I'm kind of building the shapes that I want, and then I can cut off the rest later. And you know, if I were to select these here, I can also modify, I'll probably get these ready first. So if I were to press this here to switch these modes, then I definitely have some things I want to cut out. So I can do the Pathfinder tool to minus the front to make a ring. Obviously I have the back version here that I need to cut out. So I'll select these two. That was in outline mode to see, cut these out. So now I have these two rings that I've cut out in the ways that I need to obviously like create just the rings themselves. Now that I have those, I can either copy these over in different ways. It seems like it looks like I want to cut certain pieces of this. So what I could do is go in with my pen tool and like place a point down here. I can place a point down here and either look at, let me reverse these. So now I have back to my outline, but they are individual shapes. And I can add some geometry to these. And now I can click to add a point and delete. Select these here. This is like one way of doing it, obviously, where I want to select and delete those. And now I can combine these together. seal these up. And now when I switch my stroke for the fill, I have a bit of a chunk cut out here. Another way of doing this is you have your circles, and I didn't put any points in here, but I'll draw more geometry that I want to cut. So I can decide, oh, I want to cut here. I'll literally just make like cut shapes and go here to here, for example, and then make sure I'm drawing around what I want to cut. So I'm literally like, as if I'm using paper, like creating a shape that I want to cut out. And then I'll select that and the object below it, and then cut. Same with this one. I know it's like, I'm going to draw this triangle, so I don't want to cut all of this, but I'm going to create a new cut shape where I'm just generally going to cut off in here, and then over here, I want this to come down. I'll cut this. Again, there's many ways to do this, but I can cut this, select this shape, and then cut that out. I'm also recognizing that there's some repetition here, so I can likely just do one of these and then rotate them, and we'll see if that works. So I'm going to create these triangles here. Again, I'm holding Shift for the bottom one, but it's not 45 degrees, so I won't do that for here. But I just made this triangle, and then now I can use these two, group them together, and now I have like 1/3 of this logo. I can select these, and then if I rotate, again, I'm using Shift X which is the shortcut of swapping the fill for the stroke. Very helpful if you're like, I want to see how it fills and I want to see what's under it. But I could group those. Yeah, let's group them. So Object Group or Command G. So now when I select them, I know they're like paired together. What I can do is either, copy them, try and rotate it into position, or if it's something that, like I can, let me just bring this over here as an example. There's one way where I can hit rotate and click on like a point and then hold Option to copy, and I can actually copy it around it. So I'm going to try and do that similar thing where I am going to copy this around the center point, hold Option, and let's see if this will work. Oh, pretty close. Not bad. And then I can move that into place. Just sometimes helps a little bit with geometry. Otherwise, you can do copy, paste, and then move it into place. But also, there's like so many different ways to actually do this that you probably want to build, like one full triangle, for example, and then you can cut out the middle triangle, and then put all of these circles down. So one of the examples I have here is doing that, like building all of the circles at once, and then you have a lot of geometry to cut from. Because also, I did like a quick cut here, but looking at the logo, it seems like it's also more of a perfect, like a curve there. So again, working off of this geometry, if I were to like move this down here, there's a lot here where, you want to see like, okay, well this one I want to cut with this line here, but that's already a shape, so I can use my group selection tool, deselect, just select my cut shape, copy it, deselect, paste in place, and then use that as like a cut for this, for example, and then cut that off. And then once I've used that cut, it's gone. So now I select the next one, paste in place, and it's going to bring another one back, and I can select those two, cut those off. So there's like numerous ways to do any one thing, but kind of like as we were exploring, was like once you do a cut, you lose the geometry. So it's very helpful to like copy, paste. Again, if we turned the smart guides on again that we turned off at the beginning, some of that's super helpful where, if you move something by accident, like it will want to like line things up based on where everything is. And very, very helpful if you're using clean geometry or symmetrical things in that way. So that's kind of one thing to play with as well as you go through this. Same with the trimet type, you can try and vectorize. And then, some of the other practice in here, as you were mentioning, was like worn type. You're kind of assuming, Again, like brick height is how these were originally painted, so that helps as far as a natural guide. And that's kind of a time where you might even want to bring rulers up. So view, again, all this kind of view interface stuff is in view, but Command R or show rulers, you can actually just drag a ruler out and put it like here, for example, and then like down here, and like build yourself a kind of guide with which you're then making sure all of your type is snapping to. Especially if I have smart guides on, then I can like quickly, you know, put a point here, hold down Shift, put another point, and it's gonna put things where they are. Or finding a typeface that you can then bring in, and then you're modifying those points. There's like so many different ways to kind of do that. Especially like the letter S is such a nightmare, but you know, I'm gonna put 2 points down, drag a point out. Like I typically will do these really quickly where I'm not trying to get it right the first time, I'm just getting some points in. So here's my quick version of like roughly knowing where points typically go on the letter S, and that just takes practice. But so that gave me like a really rough one, and then I'll kind of go in, I'll click one of these, use the arrow tool, you know, click here, arrow tool, click the curve itself, and then use the arrow tools to bring it like left and right. It's like a really good kind of test to try and just play around with, you know, especially there's no right answer, like it's as close as you can get it based on the, you know, the historical photos that we have. So there's a bunch of examples there if you want to play with those or the butterflies. But one thing worth thinking about is if I do have these like, say these like red shapes or something, anything that I do, like if I want the same thing to happen again, Command D is to like duplicate that action. So say I like drag this over, Shift, and I let go, Command D, I can just keep doing that. So that is very, very, very useful in many different ways. If I have like, here's like a circle, and I want to like rotate that around this point, and I'll hold Option, rotate that. Now I can hit like D, 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 and then just keep going if I want like more shapes to do that. So again, like now these I could do who knows what with all these. But Command D is definitely something where you're like, oh, I can do something like multiple times. And it's very random when like, oh, that's perfect, I'll do that. So I don't want to overwhelm all of you as I keep throwing these things, but there's blend as well. So if you have like that same thing, you know, say I want to have like a line of different shapes, I'll make 2, select both of those, and then Object, Blend, Make, and then I don't know why the default is the worst version of it, but you have to go to Blend Options, and now you can change this to specified steps, bring this down to like 5, or increase these. And this is very, very useful because also I can use my pen tool, and I can go in here and be like, I'm gonna move these around, I'm gonna like decide where these all go. So what this will do, if I bring this kind of some blank area here, is if you're exporting this for like, oh, I want to cut this out of something or screen print on a shirt or something, then what you want to do is to expand. So expanding type, expanding any of these sort of like spots, by hitting expand, it will expand that to the shapes themselves. And now from here, I can also be like, oh, this one should actually be like behind it. There's some errors with it. Or if you want to simplify these down, you can hit Pathfinder and simplify that to just one shape if you want like just one object. But yeah, absolutely. You want to always go into your outline mode to see what that data looks like. So if you want to export an SVG, this will only export like the first shape and the last shape and a line. So you try and cut this, it will be like just a line and then 2 shapes. So yeah, always want to like expand is a great example, particularly for type, but also in instances like this where you have something more complex lined up. And then another good example is like if you were to draw a line. So let me do like a type along a line. First I'll draw a line and be like, oh, I want to have like, nice flowy kind of like this curve, which doesn't need to be a fill. So I'll do Shift X, or over here again, this is swap fill and stroke. And say I want to like type something along this line, then I can just hover with the type tool over this, and then I can actually just like click, and it's going to put type along the line. So if I do want to say like, you know, pen tool workshop, and then I can make this, you know, larger, goes along here, and then I can still select this, and with the pen tool, like modify what this curve is. But likewise, if I want to print this on a shirt or something, I might be able to print it as is, but if I want that vector shape, I go into outline mode. If it's full type, then obviously that's not vector forms. I want to go to, here, let me duplicate it so I'm not damaging, or I still have my working version. Right now, they're both the same. If I go to Object Expand, it's going to ask, yep, Object and Fill, and now the difference is, here are my vectors, right? So it's also kind of fun if it's like, oh, I want to just like, let's get fun with it. I'll move these around a little bit, and you know, if I select them, they're all selected right now, so I can either use this like group selection tool to like directly select these and still have these all grouped, or I can ungroup these, and then I can just individually select these. I can always regroup them, but say we want to get like real funky with these, I can like rotate a little more free form, but I have that like rough curve is set up. Or select a few of these. Like there's so many different ways to kind of like do those versions. Again, a lot of it is like getting familiar with the pen tool itself helps to realize like, oh, you can do something really custom of a curve, or you can make a circle as well. Delete the top half. Now you just have like this perfect half here. Put a, you know, let's put type on that, and I'll center it. And you can click in here to like expand where, like how much of the type you want to, oh wow, that disappeared somehow. So it's just a little funky. Yeah, this is like pretty common to be like, oh, I have a logo and I want like type, you know, curving around it. But the best way here is actually to, yeah, you put it on a curve and then you can control like the height of it. So I can have it go like out side of the curve. Exactly. And then you also want to control like the tracking. So some of the like letters, it's really tricky to do this well, but holding Option, you can kind of like manually kern some stuff here. So we have 45 minutes. If people want to get a projector out and kind of pick up where we left off with projection mapping stuff, I can show how the pen tool works, at least within like creating custom masks in MadMapper, or I guess in After Effects, there's definitely like ways to use the pen tool to create custom masks, but it's all the same technology. It's all the same, like holding Option. I have this good kind of reference here as well that I can leave on the screen as far as like clicking creates a vector point, click and drag creates a curve. So that was like our main kind of between the two of those to get comfortable with. Alt-click modifies a vector point, removing Béziers. Alt-click and drag creates a Bézier curve. So we kind of saw that as we like drew a curve or we want to modify a curve. You're clicking the vectors themselves. And then holding Shift and holding Command are kind of like the quick between different objects. Aligning to 45 degrees for Shift, or selecting multiple things, holding Shift, clicking those. You can group those together, or holding Command, which is a quick to the selection mode. So constantly, this is like my go-to, where you're in the pen tool all the time, you're holding Command whenever you want to switch to that direct selection to select a point. And then you can use the arrow keys, move that around, but you're still in the pen tool. So you can add another point, you're all there. Versus going to your selection tool, you'll save so much time from actually going over to the menu, because you're constantly like going back and forth of drawing and selecting and modifying and drawing and selecting. So this is kind of like my good like go-to for all of those. And then of course the pen tool workshop, for reference, that slide is super helpful. So I can leave this up for now, and then walk around as we kind of mess around with different things and show people if there's any other specific like demonstrations.